Hey everybody, it's Patrick Escolas with another Banyan Technology Tire Tracks podcast. Joining me today is Lizz Harrell of Parade. How you doing, Liz?
I am doing fantastic, Patrick. Great to be on.
Hey, thanks for joining. And Liz is special. She's so special. They had to add an extra Z on it. So if you're writing Liz with one Z, it's not her. No, what is there a reason for that? Is there a story?
Gosh, what a zinger for the first question. Let's call it like double Z, double zeal. No, it's really funny, and I know we're going to talk a lot about AI and data today.
Yes,
very pattern oriented.
Okay.
So when I was a kid and started writing my name out, you'd see Harrell. So after each vowel, you have two consonants.
Okay.
So I had that extra Z. And so it's like, now it all matches. Lizzharrell. So
that's the pattern. That's awesome.
It all fits. So
that's a much better thing than when I was in school. I had to write my full name, Patrick, because if I wrote Pat, my parents were afraid the SNL skit was too popular at the time. I don't think anybody in any of my classes had ever seen it, but I could not just write the 3-letter nickname. I had to write the 7 out. And it's like, come on, guys, you're killing me.
It's incredibly funny how our parents' fears all work. So my mom's name is actually Beth, and my grandmother named her Beth because she was terrified that people call her Liz. And it all comes full circle, right?
So there you go.
So of course, hates the name Liz, and there we go. And I got to school, and I was like, could not wait to go by Liz. So I guess she was right.
That's fantastic. So you're the SVP of Customer Service at Parade. Am I correct with that?
That is correct.
All right. And as I always ask, who are you, Liz? What do you have to do? No, don't worry. We won't get that existential, but within logistics, and the freight, and where did you come from? How'd you get here? So many people I talked to I was born in freight, whether it was in the truck or at the manufacturing plant, watching the docks, but what's your story? How'd you get here?
Yeah, great question. So I was not born in freight. Although I was born, to be fair, I was born in Little Rock. I was born from Arkansas. And so I at least drove a lot around trucks, hitting a lot of lanes through Arkansas, which I know so much more about today than I did at the time.
Right.
So no, I came up through tech. So I've been in technology startups my entire career. Not necessarily the person building the tech,
right.
But really helping make sure that customers get the best use out of it. So kind of came up through the sales, selling the dream, and then moved into post-sales and making sure we delivered on the dream.
That is the dream. That's right. You're living the dream right there. That's right. Nothing like the quota coaster, right?
Yeah. And so that's the fun part. I think I've had the chance to work with a lot of different companies, a lot from small merchants trying to sell goods and services online. Mm-hmm. I've worked with the big banks and fintech companies. Recently did a stint in data working with kind of the likes of Instacart and DoorDash and Bloomberg and everybody basically trying to get the most out of their data from an analytics perspective. So
awesome.
That's a bit of my brain.
So tech obviously going to be an emphasis for this conversation, but one of the things, obviously I come from Banyan Technology. We're a TMS and API provider, as well as all of the other bolt-ons. But one thing I've seen about the logistics and freight industry is that for whatever reason, technology has been slow coming to the industry. I don't, it was one thing when I started with this company 3 or 4 years ago, when I was calling people and I'd be like, well, yeah, they got to have a system in place, right? Because my freight background is now from a system. And so many people are like, well, no, I don't have one. Don't need one. Bye. So what do you have any, what is your input as why it's taken so long for technology to come to this industry that has so many moving parts all of the time?
Yeah, I think I'll just double down on what you just said there from a moving parts perspective. That's usually one of the really interesting things is there are so many moving parts. And also, I think there are so many people, right? And so much is done with people. And when you're living in the physical world, right? Essentially,
which we still have to. We're not in the metaverse yet. Yeah.
That it's still it's about getting a physical good from point A to point B. And there's a lot of, I think, ways that you can think about it, but ultimately that's a constraint that exists. And so I think oftentimes the areas you've seen tech really accelerate like even take like fintech and payments, right? Like
Sure.
money is now completely digital, right?
Which is
You don't
terrifying.
have to handle it. But
Right.
that, like, at the end of the day, if I want to get, like my shoes or my jacket, or man, I've got like two small kids, I order a ton of stuff. I'm like, need it now, right? Like
I have four.
it,
The boxes are there all day, every day. Yep.
yeah, yeah. And so that's the thing. It's like, no matter, that's always going to be a constraint. Like, we're still trying to get physical goods from point A to point B. There's a lot of systems and people and things involved in that. And I think that's just one of the harder things. I think a lot of areas that have digitized, it's just a little bit easier because the actual like good or service is technically digital. So
okay, I like that. It's a great call out, and I add that to the brain tank here and let it digest. And while I do that, so we talked a little bit about where you come from, and how you kind of arrived at Freight. Parade. Tell me about that. I know that they have marching bands sometimes, and do you guys throw candy? What kind of a parade are we talking about?
yeah, so totally. I actually think the funny thing is, I think the reason for the name parade is, I do think a convoy of trucks, a line of trucks. I think it's actually parade, right?
Yeah, so, like Smokey and the Bandit. We got ourselves a convoy, right? Yeah,
there you go. So I think that's actually where the name comes from. But yeah, so parade's background, interestingly enough, so the founders, not necessarily also born in freight, but have been together, launched the company in 2015.
Okay.
Have background in AI, machine learning. So they're kind of like true techies, true engineers, kind of pointing themselves at a problem.
Yeah.
And then one of the founders, the problem they kind of like came to solve, one of the founders, his uncle drove a truck. And so they learned kind of about a lot. They're like, wow, a lot of this seems really interesting, that who knew it happened that way, right? And so how do you think about, so they actually launched a brokerage, brokerage is how they basically came in, spent a couple of years doing that, and then realized, you can either kind of compete with the thousands of brokers exist, everybody having their secret sauce, or we can give them technology. And so some of the things that they kind of caught on were working for them, but didn't have the expertise necessarily on the freight and logistics side of the house. And so said, hey, like we're experts in tech. And so how do we bring some of that tech to the brokerage? So
right. And with that, you mentioned AI, which no one has ever heard about, hasn't been talked about for many, many years now. But how, AI is everywhere. It's a great buzzword, and anybody that's got a startup is going to say AI, and they just bought a ChatGPT model. Like, how is AI being used within Parade? Because I assume it's not something as straight up as, hey, ChatGPT, tell me what I should get. Who should I reach out to for this load? Like, what complex ways is it using this to get you what I assume is a streamlined process, or maybe it's just more intelligent data to make actionable decisions on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, ChatGPT is like telling me actually what to say right now. So,
I'm not real. This image is induced by the Dolly system. Yeah.
I'm a deep fake. The funny part, I think AI is actually, the background for Parade it's pretty well baked in. I think at the end of the day, like just email extraction and using, language, largely to start processing the language coming through emails. It's really how Parade started. It's like, hey, like people have all this capacity technically coming in via email. How do we like scrape, read what's in the email using AI, and then parse that into data that essentially is helping brokers understand their capacity? So that was basically
awesome.
Great. Yeah, it was pretty cool, right? It's like all of these emails go back and forth. Well, there's data in there. And so instead of actually taking that data and saying, great, I'm going to have somebody go like key all of this into a spreadsheet and a database, things like that, just pull the data. And so that's interesting as a broker. That's kind of what they started doing. I said, oh, we'll start pulling the data from these emails and like parsing into our systems. And so that was the first use case. And so we scaled basically Parade as capacity management. The goal is to help, your network is your net worth. So essentially you're basically taking all of the capacity, historical data for lanes you've run, everything, and helping brokers basically find the right truck for every load. And so the newer use cases, and can kind of talk a little bit about some different frameworks about AI too. So that's kind of like a programming piece. Typically happens in the background, scraping the data, pulling it into your systems, like making sure that you can actually like leverage it.
And then there's populating the screens in front of you. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so it's you kind of reduce a lot of that modern sort of like data entry burden.
Sure.
And then now, what's interesting with our co-driver solution, we're now talking to carriers directly on behalf of the broker. So you got your loads out there, you've got an email address, carrier writes in load details. Load details, right? Instead of having a person necessarily just kind of responding, yeah, load's still available, here you go, right? Capacity co-drivers doing that for folks. So it's basically responding to all those inbound emails, working to get to price action. So all of that communication, carrier may not even know, nor may they even care if they're actually talking to a bot, because they're getting the information that they need to get to basically quote, getting faster of that. The bot responds in every email in a few seconds versus having to have somebody babysit that inbox. So it's a good experience kind of all around, and brokers get more quotes and more options. And that's really the goal of the entire thing.
That's the win. Yeah. And with that, what's the outcome there? And to your point, yeah, bot or person, it doesn't matter. As long as there's a button somewhere that says this bot isn't doing it for me, get me a person. That's all. But what are you seeing as an effect of this AI? As you said, first just from scraping the emails to get the data, and now from actively participating in the conversations.
Absolutely. So probably the first is just put your people where people are like special, right?
Okay.
Where they have value add. And so I like that, the creativity, critical problem solving, connect to all of the different things that make humans valuable. They can build those relationships. They can be more strategic, help you get basically the highest margin for each load, right?
Yeah.
And the best option, right? The best service, the right carrier, all of those pieces is not necessarily all about the margin.
Right.
And you reduce also the number of activities that they're doing just related to that email conversation back and forth. The second thing that we found out, right, is because of that speed, a lot of basically for each load that our customers have that are using co-driver, they're getting more quotes per load. So we're literally talking have brokers go from 1.2, 1.5 quotes per load, 4 to 5, right? So it's it is just a mass amount of number of quotes, less time wasted on back and forth on details and more getting to price action, right? And then the third piece, right, is really, the more quotes that you're getting, the more that we're seeing that automation of some of that digitization of freight. So that's kind of the other piece that exists, is sort of automating that end-to-end workflow to try to get more things digitized from a freight perspective. And so we're seeing just more bookings and increased percentages of loads that are basically covered digitally versus out there via, phone calls and manual entry and things like that.
So it sounds like, and this is there's some similar themes to what I've heard before. It's kind of allowing your key persons who are special to focus on those items that can't be automated, that aren't the bread and butter. Hey, that's day in, day out stuff. And I think it's also interesting. You tapped on more quotes are coming through, and one of the things I could not remember who said it, but sometimes it's not the best quote. Sometimes it's the first quote that comes through. So so within AI, I think one of the emphasis, at least from an outsider, I guess I'm an insider, who knows? But as I'm thinking about this, for all the, we'll say that there are cons to AI, or there are limitations to it, but for all those things, it spits something out quickly, and it gets it back to somebody. And I think that's probably just as important as, the most detailed, most accurate quote is getting the first quote.
Amen. Speed and quality, sometimes trade-offs, but I think that's it's definitely what we're seeing too. It's just accelerating that speed, you can go win more freight, you can cover more freight. So that's the value of the broker. So
now with something like Parade and the AI usage, is there a niche in that you're finding a broker with less personnel because you're trying to do more with less, or you're also seeing it at the large organizations too? Because who's not trying to do more with less, but it's harder to justify the workforce that you had before, but there's quantitative and a value to just having a system like that in the background, even if you have the manpower.
Absolutely. So thinking about the sort of the ultimate goal, that more loads booked per rep per day, right? That's kind of ultimately, because
that's the ultimate KPI, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So your cost to cover, essentially. And so it is right now, and what we've heard from a lot of brokers, right? And just again, I'm a bit of a newbie, but I learned from a lot of fantastic people who know way more than I do about all of this.
Those are all of my clients. Yep. They're like, Patrick, this is why
great.
this works. This is why it
I
doesn't.
ask
I'm like, I
questions
believe you.
and I try to find what everyone's like, what's working for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of the day, as long as I'm listening, I'm learning.
That's right.
You know, what they see is we've heard people are trying to focus on volume to kind of cover compressed margins, people. And so it is, how do you, if you're driving more volume, right? Well, you're keeping those carrier reps busy potentially. And so that ability to kind of like get freight covered, and sometimes, you know, like automate the stuff that's easy.
Sure.
Stuff that you do repeat.
Yeah, the no-brainers.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like automate as much of that as you can, and then focus those reps on the hard to cover loads. And so I think what we're seeing is, again, it's like, how do you deploy the talent that you've got? And that's because everyone wants to grow. But when it comes to what you've got covering freight, like put them on the best stuff, automate what you can, give them the tools to help them drive up their productivity. They'll make more money too, right? Like right there are incentives out there too. Yeah, if you're crushing your goals, then everybody feels good, right? So.
This brings up a thought to me. So since COVID, maybe the onset or the aftermath, hiring has been a hard sell just across the board, across the industry. You know, how is AI as tools becoming an effect to help that process? And I don't mean, you know, you have an AI bot go look for who you should, but I mean, you get somebody completely new to the game, and you're playing in a world where there's guys that have had 35 years experience, know the numbers offhand, know what lanes are good and what's bad. You know, how does AI play into that? It's got to.
Oh, amen. Well, and it's a great question, and I'll actually respond to it with a specific like customer story.
Oh, perfect.
Again, not the seat that I sit in necessarily at the brokerage, but you know, we were talking to a customer, and newer customer for Parade, and they started onboarding, gosh, maybe like 3 or 4 months ago. And what they are seeing on productivity from they have hiring classes, right?
Okay.
And so they're kind of like the first folks they're really getting into Parade.
Sure.
Which is pretty cool. So they're starting without the 35 years of experience, they're starting them with the tech, right? They're starting them with the tools that are bringing all of the quotes in. They're starting with like smart matching on their capacity and trying to understand those pieces. And so for people that have basically not been able to kind of bring that experience, the ramp time is so much faster with enabling people with the tools that kind of help them kind of guide them through that process versus, you know, someone that comes in with the same relationships or same understanding of, you know, like decades of data kind of living up in their head.
Yeah.
And so you can fast cycle that. And so I think that's the key thing, right? That's the hope is, as you've got potentially people that are retiring, you got to figure out like, how do you maintain the quality of talent? In those cases, that's tech should be an accelerator for that. So.
And yeah, so I think that to a lot of people, I would say assumption or the real hope is that AI and tech in general can close this gap of anecdotal, you know, and tribal knowledge that we're going to lose now the next 2 or 3 years here across the board, whether that's, we know a lot of carriers kind of decided to get out of the game in the past few years. Brokers are not having a great time now. So some of them are saying, all right, let's hang it up. And that's, you made some great points there. And I think back to this one where someone hanging it up, how does technology and AI help today, specifically in a world where the margins aren't great right now? You know, the pendulum hasn't swung back, as everybody in the game will talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's, I think that everyone's, you know, the cost to cover, really big thing. If you can increase number of loads booked per rep per day.
Sure.
I was on site with a customer just even a couple of weeks ago, and he looks like a rock star right now. He was like, you know what? Like, our volume's growing. My team has stayed the same size.
All right.
Pretty cool, man. Right. Yeah. So they're able to cover it. But, you know, like the technology is a key part. We're like part of that team. And then I think the other thing I'd say, look, like the cool thing about Parade, like we never forget a lane. You ran a lane, we got the data, right?
That's
and that is, and I think that's what's interesting. And it is, we pull all of the information from a TMS. We've got it's really easy for that tougher to cover stuff, ship to the load boards, get all that coming back, all of the quote data, the pricing data that you have. And so, typically in a world where, a lot of your knowledge may be leaving the building, quote unquote, for the people that they know how to do this stuff like the back of their hand. They're so fast. And you wonder, like, they all have their secret sauce. You wonder how they do it. I remember someone said they used to have like Post-its. It's like, I got this truck Post-it right up here. And but no, it is on Parade. Everyone's accessing a lot of the same information. You never forget a lane, right? Like, you've got history of from a pricing data perspective. And so I think that's going to be the secret sauce moving forward is, there's nothing's ever going to replace that focus in the carrier relationship and just relationships in general. That's the thing I think that is still like really critical.
That's key. Yeah.
You basically empower your reps to do a lot of things like much faster and streamlined, more automated. And then, that they get to spend their time focusing on value added activity.
And you don't have to have your desk look like, a serial killer or somebody chasing a serial killer with the pictures, the maps, and the yarn.
Oh, the map.
Yeah. I've always dreamed to be in a situation where I had to have one of those just for but it also seems like an arts and craft project. And I can't, somewhere between those two, I both love it. And I'm like, that's way too involved.
Just like, well, maybe it's what the movie, The Minority Report, where they just like you're just moving the trucks around like this. Like, hopefully that's the future.
That's closer
way
to
more fun than anything else, right?
I like that. Now, with AI and the learning, one of the things that here at Banyan we've really leveraged on is that business intelligence. And business intelligence can mean a lot of things. For my money, it's a lot of systems dumping data in one and getting the feedback and the visibility to give you actionable insights. Hey, I've got all this data. Now I know what to do with it, because the reports don't mean anything by themselves. How does AI, from your technical knowledge and with your play in Parade, how does that benefit the landscape of something like business intelligence?
Oh, amen. Well, and that's why I just spent 5 years in business intelligence. So I got a couple of well-earned opinions on that.
Yeah. I'd assume one or two. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one or two. It's funny. Like, the first thing is like the actual, like, the ability to use natural language processing is taking a lot of unstructured data and turning that insight. So as mentioned, like, all of the information exists in emails and things like that you can basically parse and like basically upload into your database. It's remarkable.
And when you say unstructured data, like, is that just those emails, or what is structured data versus unstructured data? Just from
absolutely.
From a high
so
level.
Structured data probably already is something that could potentially fit in like a table, right? Unstructured data could be like solve like social media. Right. So think about like what people are saying on Twitter, for example, or like some people are taking unstructured data that's come from.
Thanks for still calling it Twitter, by the way.
Exactly. And so that's like one thing for customer sentiment analysis. And again, like Parade's use case as well, like all of the potential emails that are going back and forth between carriers and brokers, huge. Right. Also unstructured data. There's use cases like documentation, right? I think is another interesting one too, like just pages upon pages of documentation, protocols, things like that, right? Contracts is another really interesting amount of data. So just taking a lot of that unstructured data that is very hard to parse and analyze from like where it's been, and being able to parse it into your data systems and analyze that as one. So that's definitely a piece. I'd say organizing, right? Like you can't.
Yeah, here's a stack of papers.
Right?
Put it in order that makes sense to me, or from alphabetically.
So now you get all this data. Now, how do you organize it? How do you model it? Right. And that's the thing. Like, I spent in my last gig a ton of time talking to data engineers or figuring like, how do we actually model this data? How do we actually make sure? Because it can all get really expensive. You have large amounts of data and now you model it. So AI can have a huge impact on reducing a lot of the data engineering.
Yeah, that's the goal.
And then the last is, and I think this is one of my favorites, asking questions to your data, right? You used to take an army of people that know how to write SQL and like tweak things at like the very smallest amount, say, oh, but I need to like adjust this. There are tools that are coming out that basically say, hey, just like natural language, you ask question your data, pulls
Yeah.
you up an answer, right?
Yeah.
Which
Keep
is
me away from the
amazing.
database management language,
Yeah, it'll
please.
help you
Please.
visualize it and like give you a story to go off of, which is pretty amazing. And I think that's the thing. It's like you used to need an army of data scientists, data engineers to go, set up your stuff in a data lake and then model it correctly and then like clean. And it is. And I don't think it's, I think that a lot of that will be automated. And then, the ability to ask questions and actually understand like what you can do with it. Just from like a speed to analysis and insight perspective, I think that'll be huge too. So,
and as you're talking, it has me thinking. So you take AI and to get all this business intelligence data together and do the processing. At what point do we start using AI to tell us what questions we should start asking, and then AI to say, okay, I've asked the question, how do I use that answer? Does code is coding going to be no longer? If so, then it'll be okay based on these results. Go use a smart process to think of what my next actionable item should be with it to do the thinking for me, and then let me know what you like not just an assistant, but really coding your whole decision or logic process as you get data.
Yeah. And 100%. And I think that's the thing when you think about like what a lot of the use cases are for BI across different, the business model in brokerage, for example, exists across. It's pretty simple. You got, I got to go, like I got a shipper, right? I got to find a truck and I'm there's a buy and sell, right? And that's the thing. To your point, the types of questions you typically ask of the data are probably pretty similar. And that's like, as the models learn, right? And as like the questions get better, hopefully servicing the insights proactively, I do think that's another opportunity for sure.
And as those questions get better, because as you said, it's the freight, it's one of those easy to learn, impossible to master type things, right? The concept is real simple, A to B, but in mastering it and being successful, it's all of this nuance. So possibly, and with this, as the questions to ask it better and more subtle about, I think that's probably where the predictive nature can get better. Hey, not just what should I charge for this? What affects the charge of this? How, what affects the scarcity of capacity for this lane? Historically, what will happen in the future, and give you an idea of what to look out for. So when it says, obviously something as easy as, oh, there's a hurricane. Okay, here it's going to have an effect, but exactly how, what kind of percentages should I be looking at? And from there.
And that's, and that'll be really interesting because then it's like, what do you have that's like proprietary? And that's, I think, one of the bigger questions about data too. Like, what is like that you have in your own data that's actually proprietary? And like, who owns the data, who becomes king, right? And that's where things get really, really interesting.
Yeah, no one has paid me yet for all of the ads that I get on my phone about the things that I clearly am into. Like, when do I get that, 5 cents a month, kickback?
Cutting you your check, right? Yeah. And then it is. And that's, I think, the thing about, as it grows and the insights grow and things like that, it's like, you do have your own proprietary systems, but arguably like leveraging those against more public data sets, but that's going to be played out. There's a lot of things we played out and lots of suits going on these days. Again, I'm not a lawyer, certainly, but what is publicly,
but AI could probably help us be one. Yeah.
For sure. Speaking of industries are going to get disrupted, those billable hours coming down.
I think the California Bar is one of the first organizations that was against the AI, because when it first came out, people are using it to fight speeding tickets without and it was doing it. And they're like, whoa. We charge like 5 hours for that. Calm down.
Hey, ChatGPT, man. Like, tell me, find this precedence in like the 50 pages of like legalese in here, because who wants to read that, right? To your point. I think that's what gets interesting, right? Is like, what is publicly available information that's trained the models versus what's proprietary. There'll be a lot of interesting privacy stuff over the course of time.
And without going into some of the I don't want to say cons, but I guess the friction and the controversy within that, how else? And I don't mean generally across the board how else AI can be used, but specifically within freight, logistics, brokerage, how else could we be using it that you haven't seen it used today? I mean, we've talked about how Parade used it, some pretty general case studies that we've heard or seen, and as well as how it could be used, from how it's already asking questions today. But where's an area that it hasn't touched that can have a big disruption in the industry, or maybe there pieces where AI will never take root because it's not pattern based and it's all unique? What do you have thoughts on that?
It's a great question, because I still think that even, as a company who is kind of has AI baked into our DNA, there's still so much untapped with the amount of data that is out there. And it'll always come out to like, what's the data available and how do we learn from it? Right. That's always, because even when working with brokerages, right, there's data that's trapped in disparate systems. And our vision is to pull all those kind of together and make sure that you can glean the insights and basically take action from it. But even, I think like we find that there's going to be a ton of opportunity still. I mean, we're barely scratching the surface. We've kind of started testing out some things from a pricing perspective that basically allow folks to use their own capacity to help, price lanes for it with shippers.
So
we're just scratching the surface there. There's so much information. And that's what's, I think the notion of like efficient marketplaces where there's inefficiency and things like that. I think there's a lot of questions that still exist because so much can change. And I'm learning a ton of people like, oh, this is, we've tried to look at like which markets are hot, right? And like where there's areas where there's undersupply, right? And it's just like, it's one of those things that, real-time insights and data, I think are something that could potentially like track as depending on like where people are bought into it. But yeah, it's always going to be what's available and how do we use it? So
yeah, I think that, and I think you're right on a lot of where it can be, and I think that you're also right on where the emphasis will probably stay at that rate generation. For a lot of it, I know that we at Banyan have put basically a self-service truckload rate generation portal in place where I might be a broker or a 3PL and have these clients, and more, just like the same way we order food, you and I grew up SDRs, BDRs, so we might be okay with picking up the phone, but more and more people, I don't want to talk to a person. I just want to hit two buttons, get the number, and go from there. And I know that's where a lot of our system is going, because more and more, especially that's what the customer wants. And I think AI and the BI is going to play a big part in getting them everything they need as quickly as possible without me having to go, hey, how you doing? You want to talk to a live human being today? No? All right, cool. I'll hang up now. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is. Amen for the SDR call out. Nothing will humble you like getting hung up on a cold call. Right. And we're seeing that on the carrier side as well, with folks just wanting to meet folks where they want to communicate is a huge thing right now. Right. And
No, and I think with that, this is where I've asked as many questions as I can while still sounding intelligent, like I'm following. So I'll quit a little while I'm ahead. But for you, Liz, with two Z's, sorry. This is where what do you have as a message to anyone listening, whether that's from Liz, Parade, or, just anybody that, as I always joke, the 5 to 7 people that, not including my family, that are watching or listening to this right now. What message do you have for them?
It's okay. I'll send a link out, and a couple people might listen from my side too.
That's right.
I think like the thing about it is, right, is AI is both under and overhyped. I'm not the first person to say that, right? And so it's, the overlords aren't coming to like take all of our jobs, and they're also not coming to automate everything we do so we can go hit the beach with a Mai Tai, right? So I tend to say start simple. And I kind of have a little bit of a framework for like a pyramid. It is, programming, productivity, and progress. And the programming is just finding some simple things that can be automated, right? And then the productivity is really thinking like, talk to your people, figure out like what are some of the mundane things they are doing that maybe like they don't have to do, right? Like
Right.
details emails.
And you
then,
get some of these meetings off my calendar.
Yeah, right. Like, oh, that could have been an email, not a meeting. But that it's like documentation is oddly enough like meeting transcripts on notes, right? Like, so
I love my AI note taker. It's one of my favorite things I've invested in because I can actually talk to someone without worrying about writing ever or typing everything down.
Absolutely. Right. And that's the thing. It's just like the things that start saving you time so you can do the things that like actually require like critical thinking and thought. And then progress. Like I'm a big fan of like, everyone typically meets for whether you do quarterly or semi-annual planning, like what are some of the big things that could move the business forward? And then just ask questions, could AI help with that? Is there a tool? And a lot of times, you don't have to implement it yourself. There's great tools out there, obviously, like Plug for Parade. And
you don't have to learn how it all works yourself.
And then find the right partners. Talk to some folks. Say, hey, we have this problem. We'd love to solve it with AI. Is this something that we need to go like GPT and do on our own side? Or are there other tools out there that could be the right fit and, help us kind of implement something here? Because I think there's a ton of folks trying to figure out how to like hop into this space. I think it's a really good opportunity, and it doesn't have to be like super complicated, right?
Yeah. It doesn't have to be daunting. Yeah. And I have to call out here, you have a pyramid and it's 3 Ps. Did you have other words, but they started with other things and you had to work the productivity, you had to get that pattern right.
People, Patrick, I actually start with like the slide first and then I figure out like what I'm actually going to say. And so it was like the pyramid of AI, what fits in here? Because at least again, like I think a lot in the productivity realm, when talking to people on my teams on a day-to-day basis, and it's always like, okay, how can we make that task less painful? And that's one of the most exciting things that I find, just like, running teams and organization, like, man, like if we can reduce some of the things that people do that they just really like.
Yeah. And people are not going to fight back on that either. And you talk about starting with how you want it. All I can think about it is Creed from The Office when he's in charge and he's just got an acronym and they're like, what's going on? He's like, we've got an acronym. I need to figure out what the word stands for. And it's just completely asinine.
Acronyms, it's like, again, people remember things if you keep it simple. Like if you make it really complicated, they tend to be like, what was it Liz said that our focus is for the quarter, right? I'm like, just simplicity, it wins. So
no, Liz, thank you so much for the conversation today and the insights, not only with recently getting into the logistics field, but just AI and data from your tech background. I really appreciate having you today.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure, Patrick. I appreciate the time. This is super fun. So,
hey, thank you. And for everybody listening and watching, this has been another Banyan Technologies Tire Tracks episode. If you like what you see, subscribe, comment, engage in any way. And Liz, thanks again. And I'm sure we'll talk soon.
And then thanks, Patrick.